It was called Sewards Folly, Sewards Icebox, and Sewards Polar Bear Garden. No matter what name it was known by, the American population and the U.S. Senate were particularly skeptical about the wisdom of Secretary of State William H. Seward's purchase of Alaska from Imperial Russia. What could the United States possibly get out of the purchase of a territory that was sparsely populated, freezing cold, and covered in snow most of the year? Now, and whose current owner considered it a money pit. Well, that's what the people were saying in 1867. Right now, a number of you are probably saying, wait, what? Russia owned Alaska? Yes, it did indeed own Alaska. But wait, it gets better. The Russians also colonized small outposts in California and 3 forts in Hawaii. The majority of the settlements were concentrated in Alaska, though. Okay, so how did this happen? How was Russia able to colonize North America? After Christopher Columbus accidentally discovered the New World, he was originally trying to find a route to India in order to cut out the Arab traders who were charging a fortune to transport spices from India. It was game on as far as which country could grab as much land as they could claim it as their own. So with the cries of gold, glory, and God, the Europeans scrambled to divide up the New World began. In the meantime, in early 1725, Emperor Peter the Great ordered an expedition to head east across what is now called the Bering Sea. And then he promptly died, but not the expedition. It did take 16 years, but the second Kamchatka expedition under Vitus Bering, a Dane, and Alexei Cherikov, a Russian, set sail from the Kamchatka port of Petropavlovsky in June of 1741. The first Kamchatka expedition did not produce any major results. However, with 2 sailing ships, they left on the second Kamchatka expedition. Now, the expedition soon became separated. Both captains continued, though, the expedition, unaware what had happened to each other. On July 15, 1741, Cherikov sighted land in southeast Alaska. He sent a group of men ashore in a longboat, and Alaska was claimed in the name of Catherine I, Tsarina of Russia. Now, Russia's colonization of Alaska was all about fur trading. Beginning in 1743, the first fur trading posts were cropping up along the Aleutian Islands. But by the late 1790s, permanent trading posts had been established. Unfortunately for the native Aleuts, the Russians weren't the best of colonizers. The Russian traders forced them to do the dangerous work of hunting sea otters. The Russian-American company and its practices go beyond the scope of this video. However, the RAC was not interested in the native Aleuts' safety or well-being. By the end of the Crimean War, the RAC had a problem. The company had overhunted the sea otter population. Population went from 300,000 down to extinction levels. On top of that, Russia needed money. You see, a war such as the Crimean War had a nasty habit of being very expensive and draining the Russian treasury. So Russia had a cash flow problem. Now, in March of 1857, Grand Duke Constantine, the brother of Tsar Alexander II and commander of the Imperial Russian Navy, sent a letter to Prince Alexandra Rachowsko, foreign minister to Tsar Alexander II. Now, in the letter he stated, quote, "In view of the straitened circumstances of the state finances, I'm looking for ways to reducing our naval appropriations." Now, Constantine proceeded to lay out his proposal for the sale of Russian America to the United States. Quote, "In order to get out of the difficult situation, it becomes necessary to turn to other more effective measures. I think we would do well to take advantage of the excess of money at the present time in the Treasury of the United States of America and to sell them our North American colonies." Now, Constantine, being no fool, realized 2 important points about the Russian colonies in North America. He stated his rationale for the sale in the next sentence. "This transaction would be very timely, as we must not deceive ourselves and must foresee that the United States, constantly aiming to round out their possessions and to dominate the whole of North America, will take the aforementioned colonies from us, and we shall not be able to regain them." Now, Constantine ended his letter by saying, "These colonies bring us a very small profit, and their loss to us would not be greatly felt." He signs off with, "These considerations I beg your excellency to report to His Majesty the Emperor." His failing was, better sell to the Americans and have them as friends than fight the British again and lose a second time. There was just one problem. The United States was not ready to buy. President Buchanan's administration was becoming increasingly unpopular. Any plans to purchase Alaska would have to wait until the new presidential election. That wait would be for 10 years. You see, we had a thing called the Civil War. So we were in no position to purchase any land from anybody between 1860 and 1865. However, by 1867, negotiations for the purchase of Alaska resumed after we finished the American Civil War. Now, William H. Seward, Secretary of State under Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson, was a fervent expansionist who believed that American trade would be helped by the purchase of overseas territories. Now, in March of 1867, Tsar Alexander II instructed Baron Edward de Stocky, the Russian ambassador to the United States, to re-enter into negotiations with William Seward. Now, Baron de Stocky was the perfect choice to represent Russia in the negotiations. He had represented Russia's interest as ambassador for the previous 13 years. He also married Eliza Howard, an American citizen. Stocky established close friendly relationships with many American officials and politicians, including, at that time, Senator William Seward, who would later become the Secretary of State. Now, de Stocky was the epitome of the nobility class of European society, a diplomat of elegance, sophistication, and known for his quick wit and inveterate verbal humor. Russia realized eventually they would have to sell their North American colonies or lose them. The time was ripe to put the Russian colonies up for sale again. President Andrew Johnson, a Democrat, was in trouble with the radical Republicans in Congress over his Reconstruction plans. A quick sale of the Russian Alaska colony to the United States would give President Johnson some positive press for a change, or as they say today, a bump in his poll numbers. Now, the negotiations for the purchase of Alaska was not common knowledge. A review of the contemporary newspapers of the time didn't mention a possible treaty with Russia. From the time Tsar Alexander II ordered the sale of America, to the signing of the treaty with the United States was less than a month. As the story goes, Stocky knocked on the door of Secretary Seward's home late in the evening of March 29, 1867. He told Seward that the Tsar had cabled his approval of the sale. Stocky suggested they meet in the morning to conclude negotiations. Seward, not wanting to risk a change of mind from the Russian emperor, allegedly said, "Wait, let's conclude negotiations tonight." Now, Ambassador de Stocky was taken aback. His staff and Seward's staff were scattered all over Washington, D.C., attending social events. Seward, not to be deterred, sent out orders for staff to return to work. Ambassador de Stocky gathered his staff. The negotiations concluded after an all-night session with the signing of the treaty at 4 a.m. in the morning, on March 30th, 1867, with the purchase price set at $7.2 million. That's about $144,393,081.08 in 2022 dollars, or about 2 cents per acre. President Johnson wasted no time. He signed the treaty immediately. The next day, April 1st, 1867, Seward sent the following cable to the U.S. ambassador to Russia. "Sir, I transmit for your information a copy of a treaty stipulating for the secession of Russian America to the United States, which instrument was signed here on the 30th ultimo by Mr. Stockel and myself, and has been laid before the Senate by the President. I am, sir, your obedient servant, William H. Seward." President Johnson sent the signed treaty to the Senate for ratification. It is at this point the deal could have failed. The deal had happened so quickly and in secret that most senators were ambivalent about the prospect of owning a large tract of land in the frozen north. Now, some called the deal, again, Sewards Folly or Seward's Icebox. Others referred to it as Seward's Polar Bear Garden. Now, a critic of the deal said, "What do we want with the territory covered with glaciers, icebergs, bears, and walruses?" Now, the website History.com wrote, "The world-famous editor of the New York Times, Horace Greeley, who uttered the immortal words, 'Go West, young man,' led the opposition, writing, among other things, that most of Alaska was a burden not worth taking as a gift." Some senators were equally skeptical, with one joking to his colleagues that he would support taking possession of the land only if Seward be compelled to live there. Now, interesting thing, the man who saved the deal to purchase Alaska but receives very little credit was Senator Charles Sumner from Massachusetts, a radical Republican who could not stand Johnson. This was the same Senator Sumner who had been caned years before by Representative Preston Brooks of South Carolina because of an anti-slavery speech he gave in the Senate. Senator Sumner was the head of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee. Seward needed Sumner's help and support if he had any chance of getting the treaty ratified. Sumner was also an expansionist who favored a greater U.S. presence in North America. But like most of the Senate, and for that matter the large majority of Americans, he knew very little about Alaska. He worried that this acquisition might lead to other indiscriminate, costly annexations. Now, as the chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee, Sumner was able to refer the treaty to the committee for a full investigation. This move saved the treaty from a possible defeat from an immediate vote. Now, the website Senate.gov article, Charles Sumner and the Purchase of Alaska, states, quote, "A scholar by nature, Sumner immersed himself in an intense study of the Russian-held territory, calling on the resources of the Library of Congress and the new Smithsonian Institute. He spent countless hours buried in maps, journals, pamphlets, periodicals, atlases, newspapers, manuscripts, and more than 100 books, written in English, German, French, and Russian, only the latter presenting a challenge to this natural linguist. Now, I'm living with seals and walruses and black foxes," he confided to a friend. As one historian has written, what Sumner learned about Alaska transformed him from a skeptic into a powerful persuader. 8 days later, Sumner, on April 8, 1864, stood in the United States Senate possessing only one page of notes. He spoke for 3 hours in favor of the purchase of Alaska. He began with the history of the discovery of Alaska by Bering, then proceeded into the history of Alaska under the Russians. He talked about the indigenous people of the area. He summarized all the known scientific data of Alaska, from climate to agriculture, mineral production, and mining to fishery. By the time Senator Sumner finished, he had convinced a majority, 37 of the senators, to ratify the treaty. Alaska was now a U.S. territory. So, what might have seemed an excessive amount of money to pay for a polar bear garden has turned out to be a rather smart investment. Gold was discovered in the Klondikes 20 years after the sale in 1897. Gold has been continually mined since the first gold strike. The fishing industry has been a continual source of revenue. Some of the world's largest oil fields are located in Alaska. In 2021, Alaska's gross domestic product was $50.3 billion. That's billion with a B. Seward might have negotiated the sale, but it was Senator Charles Sumner who made it happen, and he did it in only 8 days. That has to be some kind of record for the most deliberative body in the world. Now, I know Sewards Folly sounds good in the history books, but it should actually be called Sumner's success. So, what's the takeaway from this slice of history? Well, if you ever find yourself as President of the United States and a large portion of the Senate and House of Representatives can't stand you, you might want to try and maintain a cordial relationship with Congress, or at the very least a working relationship. You may need their votes. Well, this is our history, this is our heritage. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button, subscribe to my channel, and ring the bell so you'll be notified when new content is uploaded. Thank you for watching.